Why Romeo and Juliet? I think, well, first and foremost, it's a great story. You know, it's got love, it's got the thriller element, it goes into the mechanics of tragedy, and you almost end up in horror in the crypt. So it is a great story, but I think, I don't know if you agree, Richard, it's much more than a love story. It's often portrayed as being a love story, but it's a lot more than that.
Yeah, when I heard that it was going to be Romeo and Juliet, I wasn't immediately thrilled. There's so many other Shakespeare plays that I thought David would tackle, but actually when I looked at it, I completely understood what you just said, and I've seen it on stage, and I haven't seen the scope that you found in your writing in a stage play, because there's so much of the offstage world that you explore. But yeah, that's one of the things that I found thrilling about your adaptation.
I was told very firmly when I was starting to write this, don't think you're writing it for Richard Armitage. We know he did a great job on Hamlet, but he's a busy guy and he's all over the world. We don't even know if he'd want to do it or what his schedule is. So I immediately went away and wrote it with Richard in mind, because after Hamlet, why wouldn't you? But equally, more importantly, what I learned a lot from your narration of Hamlet is that when I write these things, I'm not a novelist anymore, I'm a dramatist. So I had to try to think as a dramatist, scene by scene, think of the dialogue, and think of how you would have portrayed it.
That's interesting. And I would have been furious if it had been another read. No, you're right though. It's one of the things that makes bells ring for me and makes it resonate for me, is that when I read your adaptation, it has such dramatic context, but it goes further than the cinematic. You know, it becomes a sensual experience, which is one of the things that I really appreciate about what you do.
Yeah, there's a great word in German, Kopfkino, which I'm sure since you spent so much time in Berlin, you've probably heard. Kopfkino means cinema of the head.
Right, yeah.
And what I'm trying to do in this is create Kopfkino, because the biggest, most powerful special effects machine in the world is the human imagination.
Yeah.
And if you can persuade the mind to create that movie in the head, you're really going somewhere.
I feel so lucky to have my imagination. It was formed through all kinds of different influences, film, music, being read to, and actually narrating is about just tapping your imagination and speaking what you see in your mind's eye, in your Kopfkino. Mm. But it takes a great writer to make that stimulus.
I'm not a nervous kind of guy, really, but I know that I'm going to get 3 emails from people saying, how dare you, Shakespeare must always be played by men in tights, you know, that kind of thing. But there's only ever 3 emails.
I was wearing tights when I was narrating, you know that, don't you?
I had heard, but I didn't feel I should share that. You mustn't be in awe of something when you're adapting it. You know, I'm not trying to pay homage to Shakespeare here. I'm trying to create something that Richard can turn into great audio drama. And that's really all I'm interested in, is telling a great story that respects Shakespeare. You know, I haven't turned Juliet into a vampire or a zombie or anything, but I'm not going to feel hidebound by anything that Shakespeare's done, which is why anybody who thinks this goes the way that the play does will be in for a big surprise.
A lot of the adaptations in this mold sometimes are reductive, and they're designed for people that can't get their head around the complicated text that Shakespeare wrote. So it's like Cliff Notes, or just reading a kind of reduced version of it so that you can understand it easily. And actually David's work is way beyond that. In fact, it opens so many closed doors and explores avenues that the playwright didn't. And of course, pulling beautiful lines from the original text that just suddenly resonate in the middle of a passage that is a direct link. It's like little blood vessels that directly link into Shakespeare's work. I feel that Shakespeare would be really satisfied and proud of the writing. It has a theatrical feeling to it, because we know we're coming from a theatre source, and it's everything that Shakespeare wanted and then some.
What's the heart of this story? Juliet's the heart of this story. Really, this is Juliet and Romeo, I think, because Juliet is the smartest person in the whole book, and she is the one who is most in jeopardy, because she's about to be forced into a marriage she doesn't want with a man she hates, and it's like a death sentence for her, because she is bright and intelligent, and she wants to be free to do what she wants to do, to be who she wants to be. And for me, the central element of the book is to do with that question about identity. Are we who we feel ourselves to be, or are we the person we are forced to be by society, by our family, by the world at large?
I came into this thinking Juliet was a sort of modern woman in a historical context, and she's not. It's just that David's writing allows you to sort of see the interior of her mind, how she operates as a young girl, and the face that she has to present because of what society places on her, the face she has to present to her father, the restrictions. But she clearly has a very high IQ, and she understands those kind of impositions that she has to maintain. And in that respect, she's a woman of her time, but we just get to see inside her mind, which I find fascinating.
And I think she genuinely doesn't understand why she should be forced into this thing. She's constantly saying to her father, look, why don't you just listen to me? Why don't you hear what I'm saying? And that, it's the 21st century, and lots of women are still asking that, aren't they?
Yeah. And I'm sure women in 1499 asked the same question. They were just never allowed to voice it. They must have thought, wait a second, how am I not permitted to even speak? How am I not permitted to have an opinion? Why am I bound to this arranged marriage? But I think it's really lovely that, again, open doors that David lets you inside of her mind so that you can really understand what she's thinking and feeling.
In many ways, this is a new medium, in that we're doing storytelling that mixes drama with some of the techniques of fiction. But in another way, this is the oldest form of storytelling there has been. Because if you go back to Homer, he wasn't a writer, he was a poet. He was a narrator, and he performed the Odyssey and the Iliad. And I think that's the kind of experience I'm trying to recreate in this writing, in that it has a narrator figure. There is always a narrator so that you know where you are within the story, but then you have characters who fit in around with the narrator. And it is tricky to write, but I think it's actually been trickier to perform, because the great thing that, well, one of the many great things that Richard does is that he brings this experience of being a theatre actor to it. He self-directs himself in ways that I fail to understand, and comes out with a theatrical performance that has absolutely no theatricality in it.
There was a funny moment when we recorded in London, because I didn't know David was going to come in and join us to listen. It was about day 3 or day 2, and I'd decided to give the nurse a Brummie accent, and then I was really unsure about whether it would be something that David would approve of. And I remember sort of getting to the nurse section, and I could see David in the other studio through the glass, and I'm thinking, oh my God, please don't be upset about this.
I remember that well, because Richard's sitting in this kind of glass booth, and I'm in the director's booth on the other side, and he starts to speak, and I just sat there gobsmacked, because it was as if an entire repertory theatre company had suddenly emerged on the other side of the glass. Not just the voices, but the whole intonation. You got this picture of Verona coming out from the way he spoke, and then the nurse spoke in this very regional English accent. She is a large woman who comes from a fishing village on Lake Garda, speaking in the accent of a Brummie housewife. It's absolutely perfect. You can't just hear her, you can see her, you know she's quite a large woman, you know you wouldn't want to mess with her, but she's funny as well. Actually, I think this is quite funny. There is a lot of fun in this play. This isn't a gloomy tragedy. There's a lot of fun in life, but...
well, it's also, like, because as you said, and the same with Hamlet, like any opportunity in the middle of tragedy to find those glimmers of sparkling comedy, it's like, well, I'll take them, because otherwise it can be a little serious, and it is a very serious subject. But there's something else I loved about your characterization of Juliet, is the humor that you gave her, her observation and her sense of irony. I think it was really beautiful. I
think anybody who's had a teenage daughter will understand how easy it was to write Juliet, because she is that teenage daughter that we all know and love and want to tear our hair out. My daughter is no longer a teenager, but she's going to kill me when she is.
Oh, really? She'll recognise herself.
But I cannot possibly comment. How do you set the scene? It's really easy. I just went to Verona for a week. It was freezing cold, it was February, it was Verona Carnival. There were people walking around in medieval costume, many of whom had partaken of wine, it must be said. And I wanted to build the set for this story in my head. I went to Mantua as well, because that's where Romeo gets exiled to. I couldn't write a word until I had that world, that stage set in my head. That's very important, because if I can't see it, listeners not going to be able to see it either. So I just did that through going around making notes, reading books, and taking photographs. Why 1499? 1499 is almost the holy year of 1500. It is the beginning of the Renaissance. There are parallels with today in the sense that it's just when people have discovered how to print books. So there is this flood of new knowledge coming on the market, like the internet, which really fires up Juliet and to an extent Romeo. And I don't want to push the parallels too much, but there are other parallels with today. And I wanted this to be a story about young people in a time of hope and danger. And 1499 seemed exactly that, because you had all the wonderful art of the Renaissance coming along. You had books, but you had the Borgia Pope in Rome doing all sorts of nasty things. You had threats of the Turkish Empire coming in from the east who were trying to invade Italy. It just seemed a great, great moment to set it.
Well, who doesn't want to listen to that book? As I said before, it's a sensual experience, and I mean that with, you don't just see this with your eyes. It's about how things taste and smell. And I didn't travel to Italy, but I have been lucky enough to go. And I remember going to Verona and stepping out of an air-conditioned car into heat and this incredible fragrance, because it's that bougainvillea that's everywhere. And I have that somewhere deep in my brain, but David's writing just pulls it out, and then you go step forward and describe what it is you're thinking and feeling. So, and hopefully the audience can smell it and taste it too.
Shakespeare, drama doesn't have to tell you why very often. It just says this is how it is. And we know that Capulet and Montagues are at each other's throat. There's a vendetta. But what happened? No idea why. So I had to come up with a reason why they hated one another. And what I came up with is to do with the wine industry, which is huge in Verona. And to the east, you have a wonderful grape called Garganega, which is used for wines like Soave, one of my favorite Italian wines. And to the west, you have a lot of planting of a grape called Trebbiano, which is a more common grape. And basically, one of the houses has the monopoly for the Trebbiano grape, the other one has the monopoly for the Garganega grape, and they've fallen out over grapes. And as so often with big arguments, they start over really small things. But that's part of the practical job of creating a story like this is, you just have to establish that's what caused it, and then you can move on and use it a little bit later on.
And now I've got an image in my head of Nurse angrily treading grapes in a huge vat.
Which wouldn't take very long.
No.
Friar Lawrence on stage is often just an old duffer who kind of muddles his way through making very odd decisions that you don't understand why. Again, I had to give him a reason to behave the way he does. So I make him actually a bit younger. He's middle-aged, and his background is formed by a real-life incident in Italian history when hundreds of men were massacred in a town called Otranto. And he survived and became a friar because he wanted to do good in the world. So I think he's a more rounded individual, and he's a bit more resonant than he is sometimes on stage.
It's interesting because you have to create that biography for your character. So if you are playing Friar Lawrence, then creating that enables you to play a fully rounded character, which is not necessarily what Shakespeare would have been as interested in. But as writer and actor, that's what fascinates me. As you bring in each character, you start to think, I never saw the character like this before. I'd love to play him. I'd love to play Friar Lawrence now because of what David wrote. I think the character that I enjoyed the most was probably, apart from Juliet, because of the challenge in itself to play a 16-year-old girl with this voice was kind of tricky, and pull it off was something that worried me, seeing as she's the heroine. But I enjoyed Mercutio a lot. I think there's such kind of dark humour in him, and he spends most of the time inebriated. I really enjoyed that bit. But also the wooing scene in the garden, the ability, I mean, the opportunity for me to step into Romeo's shoes and woo Juliet through this incredible poetry or this poetic mind, and then have her kind of face him in quite a surprising way. This is one of the surprising parts of the book, is she doesn't receive the wooing in the way that one would expect. So I really got a huge pleasure out of that. It's something that I just had to pitch a little bit higher to just give her air in the voice, and just, it's there in the writing, you know, you just have to imagine what she's feeling, and apart from distinguishing her from other female characters, it was just about weightlessness. I felt like as a 16-year-old, she has a weightlessness, but she slowly finds her gravity. By the end of the piece, she's become a woman, and that was interesting to me.
It is really interesting because he manages to portray both the fragility and the uncertainty of her, and this fact that there's real steel down there as well. You know, she is not going to be a pushover in the end, and she is the one who's going to drive that story. Juliet, even in the play, is steelier than she's often thought to be. You know, she isn't that simpering teenager we sometimes think. She does fight back from time to time. You have to remember that Shakespeare had a terrible drawback when it comes to dealing with women, in that at the time it was illegal for women to perform on the British stage. He couldn't use female actors, which means that no woman ever turned around to him and said, a woman would never do that. And I think, I'm sure as Richard knows, in real life acting these days, probably happens quite a lot.
Yeah.
That is a real drawback for him. We've had to kind of pay a lot of attention to the female characters and fill them out, sometimes by finding things that are hidden in the text there, and sometimes just by reimagining them. So Juliet is, you know, she is the threatened person in this story. She's the one facing the death sentence, and she's really smart and she knows it. And she's going to do whatever she can to avoid that death sentence. So that kind of, once you realise that starts to shape a character.
You can never really apply a modern psychology to the characters. It's always post-Freud, and not that Freud is the benchmark of psychoanalysis, but there is a sense of she's exploring her own mind and in relation to the world around her. And I think that's just infinitely fascinating beyond the book and beyond the play. But actually, in relation to the things that we've talked about, as I was struggling to find that voice, perhaps she is too, because she doesn't want to speak like that. She doesn't want to be weightless. She wants to, you know, be listened to and reasoned with and understood and acknowledged and even seen, because it's as if she's not seen and she's almost invisible.
I think they understand what need is, and love comes out of need. From Juliet's point of view, she needs to escape the fate that she's going towards, and Romeo offers an escape route. So, and I think that's in the back of her head, because she is a smarty. From Romeo's point of view, he's one of these guys who has to have a girlfriend, and he's failed miserably to get one so far, perhaps because he keeps spouting poetry. But there is need on both their parts, and you know, love will spring out of some kind of mutual recognition of mutual need. Love is an important theme in it, but it isn't puppy love. It isn't just infatuation. It is about a kind of mutual recognition, a mutual like. They obviously enjoy each other's company. She finds him funny. And I don't think she's found many things funny in her life. And he just thinks she's wonderful. So they're kind of well matched in that way.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing that surprised me the most, was the idea that Romeo is perhaps conditioned to fit a mold as much as she is, that in order to be a lover in the Italian sense of the commedia, that he has to, you know, be that Renaissance man that is poetic rather than the warmonger. Ultimately, he changes after the killing of Tybalt, and you see him become a man, and you see him understand the seriousness of that connection with her, because it becomes almost like a death knell to him and a lifeline at the same time, and also realizing the stakes that their love has cost them, they both kind of grow up through their love experience, and yet it's still never extinguished. In fact, it's intensified.
I think the thing, when you listen to Richard performing this, and that word is important, it's not narration, it is performance. It sounds so natural. It sounds so easy. You know, when I watched him recording it in this glass booth, he did about an hour and a half. At the end of that, I was a drained, sweating wreck. I just wanted to have a nap. And he just walks out, has a sandwich, then goes back in and does some more. He does it so easily. But he makes it very easy for you to fall into this world of 1499 Verona and this story of love and hate and violence and revenge, and perhaps in the end, some kind of escape. Once you start listening to it, it's very difficult to stop.
It's a little train ride that you get on, and once it takes you, it takes you. I mean, my biggest problem that I have is that I find it hard to sit still. So when we get into like the fight sequence in the square, I'm start waving my arms around and bumping the mic, and even like when your clothes rustle, like I have to wear kind of sweatpants and a t-shirt because clothing makes noise, and I'm constantly being told I can hear your clothes, I can hear the chair squeaking, I can hear your ankle cracking. So I have to sort of, that's the hardest part for me. When it gets very animated, I get animated as well. But that's part of the challenge, is to still maintain the kind of energy of a scene like that, which is fast and frenetic, whilst being still. But I've been lucky enough to, in my work as an actor, I've had like many sword fights in you know, theatrical terms, on stage and on film. So I kind of know the energy that's involved, but having to sit still and do it is a whole other challenge. It's a story set in 1499 in the center of this kind of cultural renaissance in Italy, and something's in the air, and it's dangerous, and it's potent, and it's highly charged with sexuality, and it's got a female character bang at the center of it who is about to probably change the world, I would say.
I think, you know, even if you've not listened to an audio story before, you should give it a try, because it is like having that movie play in your head. You know, this is IMAX between your ears, and Richard brings these characters and this world alive in the most extraordinary way, that you really feel you're there. And I hope it will introduce people to the idea of audio performance, because it's a fast-growing new art form that still quite a lot of people haven't yet discovered. And you start to realize the power of it and the scope of it through this kind of work, I hope.
I think it comes back to that very basic place of being read to. I was lucky that I was read to. There's a reason why we're read to, and there's a certain time of the day when we're read to, and it's usually as children we're read to before we go to sleep, because, I mean, I don't know where that ritual comes from, but what happens is that you fall asleep and then you dream and you go into that IMAX of what was the German word you used?
Kopfkino.
Kopfkino, yeah. I mean, the scope in the subconscious that is stimulated by storytelling like this is, you know, I get it from David's writing. I get my Kopfkino kind of stimulated, and then I just describe what I hear. But it's tapping into something that's sort of culturally very deep, I think.
Yeah, I think it's not just writers who should be thinking about this medium. You know, I think people who work in script writers, people who work in film, people who work in the theatre have got as much to contribute, if not more, than novelists, because I'm very aware that the skills I use as a novelist are often useless or even get in the way of this kind of work. I have to put them to one side and think about the script. When I first met Richard, when he was recording it, my first words to him was, you know, this is a script. I have given it to you. It's yours now, and I want him to interpret it. When I write a novel, I'm everything. That's it. It's finished. But I very much want to write a script here that he can take and work his magic upon. And that is not what being a novelist is about. So I'd say to people in film and TV and theatre, think about this just as much as I would anybody who's writing novels.